In this nugget, we're going to walk through how we can create floating pools and still have a user with their same profile every single time they connect to one of these VMs. Let's begin. One of the things that users are generally going to expect is that when they log into a machine, it's going to have their profile. For example, if Bob logs in and he logs into a virtual machine, he sets his background desktop color to red, and he has other customizations regarding his profile. Bob is expecting, as an end user, that if he logs off and then tomorrow logs on, he'll have those same customizations. Well, the great news is that when working with users' profiles, if we're using dedicated pools where the same user gets the same machine every time, we can have persistent disks that are associated with that user in that VM, and by default, it'll save his profile information to that persistent disk. However, we also have the option of using something called a floating pool. And in a floating pool, we are not guaranteeing the same virtual machine to Bob or any other user every time they connect. So now we have a challenge. How do we give Bob his same look and feel, his profile, even though he may be logging onto a different virtual machine whenever he connects? And one solution to that is to use persona management as part of View. And persona management is pretty simple. Number one, we're going to create a shared folder somewhere in our Windows environment. So maybe we have a member server, we create a share, and we share it out for our users. So there's a shared folder, a landing point, where we can store Bob and everybody else's profile information. Secondly, we take a virtual machine. So let's say this is our parent virtual machine right here that we use as part of linked clones. And with this parent, it has the agent installed on it, and we modify the policy on that parent to use the share. So for example, let's say we create a share right here, and then on the parent in the policy, we'll tell that policy to go ahead and use that share for the user's profile. And then after we've configured the policy on that parent VM, we'll create the snapshot, and then we'll use that snapshot as part of our linked clones. However, when you and I create the automatic pool, we can go ahead now and tell it that it's a floating pool, because it won't matter which virtual machine in that pool Bob connects to, because these VMs in the pool, due to the policy modification, are all going to be using a shared folder for their profiles. So Bob logs into machine number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. He really doesn't know or care because his profiles are all kept on the shared folder and it looks and feels the same to Bob. And when using a floating pool, we can use features such as do a refresh at logoff. So if Bob did change or modify things on the OS disk, the Delta disk on his virtual machine, when he logs off, that virtual machine would be refreshed back to the mothership, back to the replica as part of the linked clone. So the next time Bob or anyone else who happens to log on to that same virtual machine wouldn't be affected by the changes Bob made to the OS disk. The other option we have is a delete. We could say, you know what, when Bob's done with that machine, let's go ahead and delete the VM whenever he logs off. So when Bob logs off, in the background, Composer is going to communicate with vCenter to go ahead and tell it to delete that virtual machine. And it would be deleted. And in our pool, if we said we always want to have 2 or 3 virtual machines ready, that would also trigger the creation of another virtual machine. So our first step is to set up a Windows share. Now, just for convenience in the lab, because I've got this connection server that is able to set up shares, I'm going to put the shared folder on the connection server. In a production environment, this may be another member server that's dedicated for file services and not doing multiple things. So the folder I've created right here on the desktop, again, just for convenience, is called user profiles $. And again, it's on the desktop here on this connection server, just so it'll be easy to go and reference and look at when we need to. And currently, if we open up that folder and look at the contents, it is empty. Next, we need to share that folder, so we'll right-click, go to Properties of that folder, we'll go to Sharing, and then we'll click on Share. And what I've done is I've set up this folder to be shared with domain users. And you might think, whoa, that seems like quite a bit. Read and write access for all the domain users? Well, that's just from the sharing perspective. And then with Windows rights on the actual folders that'll be created, that'll lock it down to the individual users for access. So once that folder is shared with the domain users group, and then we go to the security tab for that share, we can also see that here I've set up domain users with, again, full control for that folder. Again, referring to this user profiles $signs folder. So that is set up. Our share is currently out there and available. Next, we're going to go to our parent virtual machine, where the Horizon View agent is already installed. And what we're going to do is we are going to modify the policy on this VM to tell this virtual machine that we want it to use Horizon View's persona management and to keep the profiles for the users on a specific share. Now, all by itself, policy management on a Windows machine knows nothing about Horizon View. So what we are going to do is we are going to add in a template so that we can set up those specific instructions for persona management with Horizon View. And then once it's perfect, we'll create a snapshot of this virtual machine. And then we'll tell Composer, as it's creating linked clones, to use that snapshot for the replica, the base image for those VMs. So to change the policy on this local computer, I'm going to run Group Policy Editor, which is gpedit.msc. And there are other ways of getting there, but that's certainly one of them. Now our first order of business, now that this is open, is we want to add in the Horizon View template so that we can modify and configure the settings for persona management. And to do that, under Computer Configuration, we are going to right-click on Administrative Templates, and then from the drop-down off of Administrative Templates, we'll simply select Add or Remove Templates. So if we click on Add, we can then browse for the correct template to add. Now on this computer, in my Downloads folder, I had this file called VMware Horizon View Extras Bundle 3.x, and it was a zip file. So on this computer, I extracted it, so it created a folder of the same name, and then all the extracted files are in there. And the template that we're after is this one. It's viewpm.adm, and the PM is for persona management. That's the template that we want to add to our parent virtual machine. So if we click on Open, that adds the template to this virtual machine. So we can now modify the details associated with that template. So once we've added that template, we can expand the Computer Configuration Administrative Templates, and then we'll go down to Classic Administrative Templates, and there we'll find the VMware View Agent Configuration. And then if we expand that, we have persona management, and if we expand that, we have 4 separate sections regarding persona management with Horizon View. So our next step would be to select roaming and synchronization. So over here on the right, we have manage user persona. If we want to edit those settings, we could right-click, select edit, and from here we'd simply click on the radio button for enabled. Now I've already done this. I went through this because I wanted to verify that it would all work before I demonstrated it. So I simply clicked on the enable checkbox, and then I clicked on next setting. And when I clicked on next, it really just took us to this next section inside of that template. And this one's asking us about the persona repository location, the shared folder where we're going to keep our user profiles. So I clicked on the radio button saying I want to enable that, and then I put in the path to my share. So 10.4.4.115 is another interface on my connection server that's on the same subnet as my virtual machines. So in a production environment, if you had your DNS set up correctly, you could have a fully qualified domain name there as opposed to an IP address, and that would be perfectly fine. In fact, it would be preferable, because that way if you ever change the IP address of the connection server, you won't have a whole bunch of profiles that are pointing to a specific IP address. They can simply follow DNS and do the resolution on demand. And then on that server, we have the user profiles $ shared folder, and then we have %username% where the user's profile will be kept. And those are the 2 settings that I modified for this demonstration. Here in vSphere, because this is a virtual machine, I'm going to go ahead and right-click on the parent VM and simply say that I want to shut it down, shut down the guest OS. And because it is running VMware tools, it will do a nice, graceful shutdown of that virtual machine. That is, once I click on yes. So now that that virtual machine is shut down, our parent VM, we can right-click, select Take Snapshot, and take a snapshot of that virtual machine. And because I've already gone through this process in testing to make sure it would all work correctly, and if we go to Manage Snapshots, we can see those snapshots. And there it is. Template for PM for persona management set on parent. And that, my friends, is the snapshot that we are going to tell Horizon View to use to create the replica for our link clones in the new pool, the floating pool that we're about to create. So here in Horizon View Administrator, we are going to create a new automatic pool using linked clones. And to clean things up a little bit, I did remove some of the other existing pools, so I'd have some more resources. And right here from the dashboard, here's the overview status of the virtual machines in vCenter. So at the moment it has none that are preparing, none that have problems, and also none that are prepared for use. So to create a new pool, we'll go under Catalog and select Desktop Pools, and we'll click Add to create a new pool. So we'll select Automated Desktop Pool, we'll click on Next, we'll specify Floating, which means that users are going to be randomly assigned virtual machines from this pool. We'll click on Next, we'll specify that we want to use Composer linked clones, and it gives us our options of which vCenter and associated Composer servers are available. So that's selected, we'll click on Next. We'll call it Floating Pool. If we wanted to assign it to an access group, we could do that right here as well. We'll click on Next. Let's configure this pool so that if the user disconnects without logging out, that after 5 minutes in our lab environment, we'll automatically log them out. And then let's take a look at this option right here. Delete or refresh the virtual machine when the user logs off. Now, by default, it's set to never. However, if we said delete immediately, that means when Bob logs in and uses that virtual machine, when he logs off, Composer in the background is going to delete that virtual machine from the pool. And you might think, oh, that's a problem. If he deletes the virtual machine, nobody else can use it. Well, if we set up provisioning to have at least 3 virtual machines up and running, that would simply trigger the creation of a new virtual machine so that there would be an additional VM ready after provisioning and customization is done. The other option we could select is do a refresh immediately, and that way if there's any changes that the user made to the Delta disk, the OS disk, that when they log off, that would be refreshed the way it was back at square one. Either way is going to bring us back to square one, whether we delete the virtual machine and create a new one for somebody else, or we refresh the existing virtual machine back to the way it was. In our lab environment, let's go ahead and say we want to delete the VM after the user logs out, because that's a little more exciting to watch in the lab environment. And then we'll click on Next. We'll specify a naming pattern for our VMs, and we'll call them floater-vm- and then a 3-digit number, 001, 002, and so forth. Next, it's asking us about what the maximum size is, the maximum number of machines. So let's go ahead and say 100. And then number of spare powered on machines. And what the heck, let's say we want 5 virtual machines. And then we'll select under provision timing. Let's go ahead and do provision machines on demand, as opposed to provision all machines up front, and we'll click on Next. It's asking us about the disposable disk and whether or not we want to redirect disposable files like the swap file for that VM to that disposable disk. I'm going to go ahead and accept that as a default and click on Next. I'm going to click on Next. I'm going to specify the parent VM. We'll browse for it. There's our parent-PM. That's the virtual machine that we took a look at the policy editing on and said that we wanted to use persona management. So we'll select that one. Click on OK. Next, we're going to click on Browse to specify the snapshot associated with that VM that's going to be used to create the replica for the link clones. So we'll select the only snapshot that we have for that VM, and we'll click on OK. Next, where do we want to put them? And I didn't create a separate folder for them, so if I specify Vegas, it will automatically create a folder based on the pool name for us, which is fine, and I'll click on OK. Next, which computing resources do you want to use to support this new pool? And we'll click on Browse, and we'll select the cluster named Cluster, and we'll click on OK. And then step 5, what resource pool do you want these VMs to end up in? I've got a resource pool called View Desktops. I'll put them in there. Click on OK. And regarding the data stores I want to use, that's step 6. I'll click on Browse, and I've got one data store called iSCSI. It's got 525 gigs of free space. It's recommending a minimum of 430. Or if our Delta disks are expected to get really, really large, it says I might need 1.7 terabytes. However, check this out. Because we're deleting the VMs when the user logs off, if the user is making a lot of changes to their C drive, to their Delta disk, and adding a lot of files and what have you, and it starts to grow, the second they log off, because it's going to be deleted, I'm not really worried about that becoming very, very huge. So we'll click on OK. And with those settings in place, we'll click on Next. We'll say yes to the View Storage Accelerator, and we'll say yes to reclaiming disk space. I'm not going to set any blackout times. So we'll click on Next. I'm going to put the new VMs in a container called Computers. We could browse and go to Active Directory to put them in different containers if we wanted to. Here we have the option of reuse pre-existing computer accounts inside of Active Directory. So that'd be a situation where we have a new VM where we have the same name as a VM that's already in Active Directory. Can we reuse that account, or should we recreate one? Do we want to use Quick Prep, or do we want to use SysPrep? Now, Quick Prep is from VMware, and there are some really cool benefits, including it's a lot faster for customizing a virtual machine compared to SysPrep, which is going to require a few reboots in the process. However, the negative of Quick Prep is it does not generate a new security ID for a VM. So if you need a new security ID, you're going to bypass Quick Prep and you're going to use a customization specification, which in turn is using SysPrep for part of the customization it's going to do on a virtual machine. So because I already know that I have a customization specification in our lab environment called DOM1, which changes the security ID, it adds a machine into the domain, and I've already tested it. And that's another really important point. We want to test manually creating a new VM, applying a customization specification in vSphere just to make sure that it works. So we'll select DOM1, we'll click on Next. Here's a summary of what's about to happen. We'll go ahead and click on the checkbox that says we want to entitle users after this wizard finishes. We'll click on Finish. And now we're at the entitlements. We'll say Add. We'll specify that we're looking for just groups. We'll type in domain, press enter, or click on find, either way works, and go down to domain users, select that, and click OK. And that will entitle that group so it can use the resources in this pool that we're just creating. So we'll click on close. So just for grins, let's go ahead down under resources and click on machines. And you'll notice it's got 5 virtual machines that it is currently working on to provision and get up and running for us. And that's because we told it we want to have at least 5 available and ready at any given time. So at this point, we'd want to go ahead and do a quick workout or go to lunch or do something else, because this is going to take between, depending on your environment and how fast your systems are, somewhere between 15 and 35 minutes for the process to complete. All right, my friend, now for the big test. It has been about 40 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and click on refresh in Horizon View Administrator and check it out. We now have all 5 virtual machines, VMs number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all now available. So with these 5 virtual machines in this pool now available, let's go to Bob's physical computer. We'll connect over to the connection server, and we'll gain access to one of those VMs in the pool. And when we do, the personal profile for Bob will be kept on a share that's being served up by CS1. So subsequent logins, whether it's to VM number 2, 3, 4, or 5, because they're all configured for view persona management, Bob should have access to his same look and feel based on his profile regarding his desktop and other profile-related configurations. So we're now sitting at Bob's computer, and we're going to launch the Horizon View client. We'll connect to our connection server, and we have our RDS pool. We have some apps being served up by RDS, and we have the floating pool that we just created. So if we double click on the floating pool, it should connect us to one of those VMs from that pool. Bob's profile is now being created, and it's going to be stored on that shared folder location in a subfolder just for Bob. So let's customize Bob's profile by changing the desktop. We'll right click, we'll select personalize from the drop down menu, we'll scroll down and say we want to change the background, and let's use this picture of the parachute. So we'll select that, click on save changes, and that's Bob's desktop. Now that's stored as part of Bob's profile. We could also create a folder on the desktop. We'll right click, we'll say new, we'll select folder, and we'll call it Bob made this folder, and we'll put it right over here. So we've got a custom background, and we've got a custom folder on Bob's desktop. Let's open up File Explorer, and we'll right click on this PC, go to properties, scroll down just to verify which virtual machine we're connected to. So at the moment, we are connected to floater-VM-004. That's the VM we happen to get from the floating pool, and we're now using as Bob. So let's go ahead and disconnect and log off from this virtual machine. So from the Horizon View client, we'll select Options, and then disconnect and log off. We'll click OK to confirm. And let's go take a look at Horizon View Administrator to see what's happening in the background. So in Horizon View Administrator, unfortunately I didn't get there quite quick enough to see it happening, but you'll notice that VM number 004 is gone. It is no longer there. If we'd gotten there immediately, we would have seen the floater VM 004 with the comment saying it's being deleted, but it is already gone. It has been deleted. And because we configured the pool to have 5 spares, take a look at this. It has started creating VM 006 and is in the process of having that provisioned and customized. So if we go back to Bob's computer for a moment, and on Bob's computer, if we launch the VMware Horizon client again, we go to CS-1, and once again we connect to the floating pool, and it has now connected us to a virtual machine once again. And from Bob's perspective, he's got his parachute, he's got this special folder on his desktop that he put there, and all of that profile is being stored on the repository on that shared Windows folder. So if we select File Explorer, and we right click on this PC, and say Properties, now if we take a look at the virtual machine, we are now on floater VM 005. In this nugget, we've demonstrated how a user can be connected to a floating virtual machine, but still have their same look and feel, their same profile being applied every time they log in. I appreciate you joining me for this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.